Today's guest is Jaime Cabrera, VP and Group Creative Director at In Ocean, host of Confessions of a Creative Director, author of What's the Big Idea, entrepreneur and CEO of El Músico Tequila. Jaime is a lifelong storyteller who has spent decades helping some of the world's biggest brands connect with people through creativity while also building brands of his own. Jaime, welcome to Fully Managed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I like that introduction a lot. Thank you. I
I'm
sound
glad.
so important. Yeah.
You are. Um, so you describe yourself as a storyteller before anything else, which I love because I can relate to as a podcast host. So I'm curious, looking back, what's a lesson like songwriting, because you're also a songwriter. What's a
Right.
lesson songwriting taught you about human nature that like advertising never could?
What is that's a great question. Um I guess I guess the answer I think would be that a well-crafted lyric, something that is poetic, something that contains a lot of detailed information in a small amount of words is really powerful. And I think that sometimes in advertising we lose the poetry. We work something over to death, right? We work it over and over and try to make it as concise as possible, which is important in songwriting too. But sometimes we just take all the magic out of it and all the poetry out of it. So I think, that's something that in songwriting you have a little bit more freedom to do, right? Is to be poetic, use a nice turn of phrase. And again, that's also done in advertising, but I feel like sometimes we get so caught up in things like legal, or you can't say it that way because that's promising this or that or the other, or we get caught up in trying to maintain true to the brand and things like that. So I think that can be kind of limiting.
That's so cool. That was such a good answer. And I love how it can really it feels how songwriting has like influenced your professional life, and it's so cool that you had that to like get inspired from. And like you are, that's what I loved what you said about poetry and how sometimes in advertising you lose that, but you were also like always so connected to that because you had also your hobby of songwriting. So I think that's such a cool like path.
Thank you. Yeah.
You also have your podcast, which is the coolest name ever. I told you that on our discovery call. You've interviewed dozens of creative leaders on your podcast. Has
Right.
there been like a belief about creativity that you held like strongly like 10 years ago that those conversations have has changed?
Yeah, I think what I've taken away from all of this is that there's more. I think there's a little bit of a mythology around creative directors and sort of creative leaders, that there's um, a lot of sort of magic involved, or that the one person really can has this incredible reach into the creative mind and is a genius and things like that. And I think there certainly are people, but I think what it comes down to is that there's just a lot of work involved in it, right?
Yeah.
I think the as you're coming up as a creative director, you always have Don Draper from Mad Men in your mind, right? Where he would just
Mhm.
walk into a room and be able to, on the spot, come up with the big idea, and everybody's either clapping or in tears, right? And that's a big myth.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's happened once in my career where I was sitting in a meeting and an idea came to me and the client was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing." Maybe not even the one time. Maybe I'm imagining it, but I think that's a myth that causes more problems then helps, because I think what happens is, as a creative director, you're sitting in the room, going, oh, I'm gonna say this idea and everybody's gonna love it, right? And instead of listening to what's going on in the room, and listening to what's really being said, your mind is too busy trying to achieve that moment of like, oh my God, Jaime, that's genius. Like, oh, how did you come up with that? You're brilliant, approved on the spot. And as we know, that rarely ever happens. It's a lot of iteration, it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of back and forth. And, I know a lot of people say never compromise your vision. But the fact of the matter is that you do have to compromise sometimes, and you do have to, try to build consensus among your team, among leaders and things like that. So I think that's probably what I take away, is that we need to kind of remove that mythology around creative directors and sort of creativity in general, and just focus on doing the work, because that's what it's about. It's about doing the work. So I think that's what I take away.
That's a really refreshing take. I think like most people would assume the opposite of, the roles of creative directors. So it's cool for you to humanize it.
Yeah, and I think, I think it's true. I mean, as much as I would like for it to not be that way, I would love to be Don Draper and be able to stand up in the middle of the room and just. But the fact of the matter of that it's just not true. And maybe it is for some people. I had Greg Hahn from Mischief on my podcast, and the guy truly probably is a genius creative. And maybe it happens for him, and maybe it happens for other people that are really brilliant. But if their clients are similar to clients that I've worked with in the past, it's tough. Because there's a lot of stuff that, as creatives, we don't know regarding the business, right? So I'll just kind of give you an example, or fictitious example. But we may come up with an idea that is just brilliant on paper, but we may not know that there's something happening behind the scenes at a company, where there's a new product that's being developed, or there's a change to a product that renders the creative idea that we just came up with, obsolete, or it doesn't work anymore. So there's all these. So then what do you do, right? So you have to go back to the drawing board, take that into account, come back with other ideas. The chances are that you come back with another idea that's equally brilliant, or maybe you don't get there. So I think that it truly is sort of a little bit of a mythology that still exists. That we need to sort of address head on, and be more realistic about. I'm all about, being realistic with things, because I think when the real scenario, that's truly when I think better ideas come from. I will say more effective ideas, because there's a difference between like a really big, cool idea that's awesome, and then there's another that's a really big, cool idea that actually moves the needle for the client. And I'm all about that kind of thing.
Absolutely. That's very refreshing. And you spent nearly 30 years trying to capture people's attention. I'm curious, what's something people care deeply about today that they cared just as deeply in 1997?
Something that they care deeply, that they still carry deeply about. Now, do you mean, let me ask a clarifying question here. Do you mean you're talking about just consumers, or
Yeah,
do you,
consumers. Yeah.
yeah, what do they still care about very deeply? I think, a lot of people talk about authenticity, and it's a hard concept to really understand. Are consumers really thinking about authenticity? I don't know that they think about it as much as it's sort of a subconscious thing, where they can see something and go, that doesn't seem authentic to that brand. So I don't think they're consciously necessarily thinking about it, but they're in their mind and their body, they feel some kind of,
Something's off.
some kind of friction, right? Some kind of like, vibration that's like, oh, that doesn't feel right. So I think authenticity is still important. And I don't know that people cared about it as much before, but I think people care about it, definitely care about it now more than ever. And that's, companies doing good instead of just, taking and taking. I know that I shop with my dollars. In other words, if there's a company that has done something that I don't agree with, like on a social
Yeah.
level, I'll give you an example. When Target very quickly backed away from their LGBTQ initiatives because
Mhm.
of, pressure from the Trump administration, guess where I don't shop anymore? And my wife and I have been really good about that. We just don't
Great.
do it. So I think people, are concerned about that now more than ever,
Hmm.
and so that's something that I think will continue going forward.
I love that answer. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you you have spent years helping brands find, their big ideas. What's their fastest way? What's the fastest way you can tell whether an idea has like real emotional power or it's just like cleverly packaged?
What's the best way to
No,
to
what's
do
like
that?
what's the fastest way you can tell whether or the best way you can tell whether an idea has like a real emotional power or it's just like cleverly packaged?
That's a really hard question, and I don't know that you ever really know until you put it out
Okay.
into the market on whether it really is going to work. Obviously, you can do focus groups, and nowadays you can do even an AI focus group. I know I've kind of done that on my own for the tequila brand, right, where you can kind of build a panel, but you kind of don't really know until you get it out there and see how people react. I think you got to take steps to try to set yourself up for success, whether that's just really working with the idea till you think it's right, whether that's doing a focus group, whether that's, you know, sharing it with some trusted people and getting their take on it, whatever it is, you got to try to set yourself up. But I don't think you really can know until you put it out there.
Yeah. And adding to that, like what's a question you find yourself asking about ideas today that you weren't asking 10 years ago?
I think, and this sounds kind of like so basic, but I think asking the question of what truly are we trying to solve, or what behavior are we truly trying to create or affect. I think that asking that question gets bypassed even to this day, right? Because, and sometimes it's not due to anybody's fault, except that you're moving so fast. I mean, we're moving at the speed of social media. We're moving at the speed of culture. So sometimes, especially if you've been working with a client for a long time, right? Sometimes we tend to skip a little bit of a step because we're trying to meet a deadline or whatever. But just going like, well, hold on, what are we trying to actually do here? Because there's different things could work differently, right? If we're just trying to create some broad awareness, that might lead you to a certain solution. If you're trying to get people to take an action, like go to a website to take advantage of a special offer, that's a much different thing, right?
Yeah.
That involves a little bit more education, or more of a detailed sort of path to get there. So I think just asking that question is super important now more than ever, because we're moving so fast. And sometimes, again, you think, I know, yeah, it's another day, we got to, this is the main goal, but it's like, maybe it's not, maybe there's something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's what I would say.
Okay. And what's a skill you've seen turn talented creatives into influential creative leaders?
I think listening first, and again, avoiding the thing that I described earlier, where you're getting information, let's say from a client or from internally, you're getting briefed, and instead of listening, you're kind of thinking like, I'm gonna say this thing because I think it's really cool, and I'm gonna be the hero. So I think listening is a big one. I think getting all the information that you need first before you really start throwing ideas out there. I think the other one is not falling in love with your own idea. Sometimes um, creative leaders tend to fall in love with their own idea, and then something happens that's called the anchor effect, right? So if you're a creative leader and you're in a room and you're brainstorming on some concepts, and you're the leader and you come up with an idea, guess what's going to happen? All the other people are going to latch on to your idea because you're the boss.
Yeah.
And then you're going to spend 20 minutes of an hour session that you've called, or more talking about that one idea because, well, the boss came up with it, so let's talk on that. So that's one thing, and I think good leaders should contribute ideas, right? But if you're a creative director, your main role is to kind of make the ideas better, shape the ideas, course correct the ideas, take the ideas into a different direction. And you can't do that if you've latched onto if you've pitched your own idea and everybody is falling in line because you're the boss.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, when I'm leading a brainstorming session, it's kind of like we get to an idea that's kind of interesting. We're like, that's great. Let's park that. Let's write down the main points of that. And let's move on. What's the next thing? And not let anybody sort of latch on something for too long. So I think that's that's another a way to work that I think can take a average creative director into really a big creative director. I think also asking a lot of questions, and this is tough. I will say, because again, everyone is moving so fast. Clients are busy. You sometimes feel like this might be a stupid question. I don't want to ask that.
Yeah.
But the more that you can ask questions and get clarity and get constraints, even if it's kind of like, oh no, we'd never do that, or oh no, we don't want to talk about that. That's still valuable because that's a constraint, right? That's going to apply some constraints to your thinking, which is only going to make your idea tighter and tighter and better. So I think asking questions, as difficult as it can be, is really powerful.
Yeah, that's another really refreshing take. And that's a great reminder. I can see why that's made you like a fantastic leader.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And for most of your career, you've helped out brands tell their stories. But with El Músico, you suddenly became the person responsible for the story. So I'm curious about this experience. Like, what did that experience teach you that years of advising clients never could?
Yeah, I think it's given me even more empathy for clients, because when you're suddenly in charge of making the decisions about certain things, right? And I have partners, founders, and another creative partner. She and I sort of lead the creative side of things, but you suddenly realize, like, oh, this isn't as easy as I thought, right? Because there's a lot of things to consider, right? So now when you're completely in charge, it's like, well, I like this, but is this really what we should be doing? Is this a mistake? Is this, you start to second guess yourself, and then you start to go like, no wonder, clients sometimes behave this way, where they're like, let's combine this idea and that idea, right? And as a creative, you're like, no, the idea's got to be this way, and so I think it's given me a lot of empathy for the client side of things. So that's definitely one. I think the other thing that it's also taught me is there's a lot of stuff that I still don't know, that I'm still learning, that I thought, I would have a better handle on, right? Like, and I'll give you an example, like social media, right? It's never really been part of my day-to-day work, because the work that I do is mostly in the experiential sort of world, some content. But in terms of social media strategy and social media, what are we putting up, and what's the cadence, and what type of content, and all that, I guess in my mind, I thought that I would just, instantly sort of grasp it, but it's been a little bit of a learning curve. It's like,
Yeah.
well, what should we be putting on there? How frequently should we be doing it? And it's definitely been a little bit humbling. That said, we're having a lot of fun because we're able to create the things that we want to create, that we want to see in our brand. We're able to kind of, build that brand from the ground up, and what it means and what it's all about. What would the brand never do? What would the brand
Yeah.
always do? Those sorts of things are really, really fun because, we get to sort of call the shots on
Yeah.
all that. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine how unique it must be to be on the other side of the table. But you're carrying, so much wisdom and experience to this, so, and like you said, you're having fun, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, where I think having fun is sort of a thing that sometimes goes by the wayside, right? Because we're
Absolutely.
so busy and we're trying to meet deadlines. But I've always found that the best creative always comes when you're having some fun, and you're interacting with your partners, with people from different groups within the agency, or within your own creative team. If you're having fun, I think it produces better results. And I think we need to remember that at the end of the day, we're not curing cancer. We're making ads and we're trying to sell products, and it is important. But I think having fun leads to better work, and that means not taking yourself so seriously, not taking the stresses and the worries, not ingesting those and taking them all the way into your soul, because then you're not having fun. And I think it truly affects the work, I think.
Absolutely. I feel that in my heart. I think there's so much wisdom in that response.
Thank
And
you.
after like nearly 3 decades in the business, what's a creative truth you have become more convinced of with every passing year?
What's a creative truth that I've become more with every pass? Okay, let me think about that. That's a tough one. Well, I don't want to necessarily repeat myself, but I do think that mythology of the big
Yeah.
aha moment, and I think that I believe it more and more, I think, as I go along, and it's tough because when you're managing and you're overseeing people that are younger in their career, and very they're still tied a little bit to that mythology and that thinking, and in some ways you don't want to take that from them, because that's a good driver, right? And you want people
Mhm.
to be excited and motivated, and like have that hunger. um, but you also want to, I think, try to balance it a little bit. So it'll come with time. I think people will come to realize that it's all about putting in the work, and showing up, and working with your team, and getting your hands dirty, and rolling up your sleeves, and that it's really more of a process than it is like this magical sort of inspiration that's going to come to you. And that's definitely part of it. Those you'll get those things, but they're usually about a smaller aspect of the work. Like, oh, I had this great idea for, in our world, I had this great idea for a giveaway that we're going to do. That's going to, and that can come from inspiration. But when you look at the work as a whole, it's like, it's a lot of work. It's not just going to come to you in a flash.
Absolutely.
So,
That's
so I guess you want to balance. You don't want to come off as jaded, or cynical or anything, but you do want to have that kind of realism, because I think when you understand the situation realistically, then that's when I think you come up with
yeah,
the best solutions.
I love that. Jaime, thank you so much for joining me today. I enjoyed
Thank
this
you.
conversation so much. I think that underneath all the talk about creativity and branding and leadership, like there was this deeper theme about understanding people, and your perspective comes from like decades of experience, but it still feels very curious and thoughtful and very human. And so thank you for sharing your stories, your lessons, and your generosity with our audience. It was great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I hope the listeners find something helpful in here, and you can always. I love just kind of helping the next generation. That's why I started the podcast, and that's why I wrote the book. And I get outreach from all over the world, really, from folks that are, want to ask a question or need a little advice or need to be connected to somebody. So I'm always available on LinkedIn if anybody wants to shoot me a message. I enjoy it. I enjoy helping people sort of get to the next level or answer some sort of question. So please let them know they should reach out if they have any questions or would like to know anything.
You heard him. You're the best, Jaime.
You've been listening to Fully Managed, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest, and to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend and, of course, subscribe.